Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Talking Plants with Tiki Tropicals. Today I'm going to be talking about Zantedeschia, which is that plant there, and these two Colocacias which I have overwintered in my greenhouse, Yellow Splash and Redemption. So let's see how they all got on. So let's start with this plant. This is Zantedeschia Hercules, and the first thing I need to mention is the variety name, because this gets sold under so many different names. Zantedeschia White Giant, Zantedeschia Speckled Giant, there's quite a few out there I think. I believe the correct name is Zantedeschia Hercules, because the nursery owner that first brought it into the UK stated that when he brought them in, the large green leafed variety with the white speckles was Zantedeschia Hercules, and the large green leafed one without the white speckles was Zantedeschia White Giant. So on that note, the fact that he was the person that brought it into the UK originally, and that's what he stated, I will always pretty much keep and stick with that. This plant is what I brought it as, Zantedeschia Hercules. So I've got all that political stuff out of the way. Great plant, can stay out all year round, pretty much hardy I would imagine for most people, especially in the UK. It does get damaged by the frost, it will sort of mush down to the base, but it pretty much can come back from the ground every single year. I've had this planted out in my garden for probably about 11-12 years now, and it's got through every single winter. It's always come back. Some winters it hardly gets touched, just a little bit of leaf damage, and others it gets proper horrible mushy to the ground, but despite that it always comes back. Now this plant will pretty much, if you give it the right conditions, can get up to the size of maybe 5-6 foot tall. You know, I haven't tended to have it that tall. The flowers have got that height, but the actual leaves haven't. I find that if you grow it in sort of part shade, semi shade, I just think it looks a healthier plant. I'm imagining there's a lot of people out there that can grow this in full sun, and may say with their experience that works really well. I'm giving you my experience, and personally for me, I've always found it does better with a bit of shade, especially in the hottest time of the day, probably because it likes plenty of moisture during the summer, and it just helps retain that moisture and keep these big old leaves looking green and lush. It produces large white arum type flowers late spring, early summer. As far as I remember, probably about May time. Absolutely stunning plant, well worth having in your garden. Easy to propagate by division, or I've even grown quite a lot of them in the past by seed. So yeah, definitely well worth growing. Then I'm going to go on to these couple of Colocacias. So first of all, Colocacias can be quite hard to get through winter, depending on the variety. If you're growing something like Colocasia Pink China, that's a hardy Colocasia that most people could keep outside all year round. But with Colocasia, variety is a bit like, how can I explain it, a bit like a palm tree. You can't put them all in the same category. So Trachycarpus would take colder climates, a coconut palm wouldn't, and some of the Colocacias are like that. Some are just really love the heat, and you know, can be a bit tricky to get through over winter, where some like I say are hardy and not a problem. So these two I was skeptical about. The one on the left is Colocasia Redemption, which I've done a video all about. I wasn't sure if this Colocasia would be hardy outside, so I haven't tried it. But this one and the yellow splash, have both been kept in my greenhouse, which has just been kept frost free. The heater only comes on if it gets down to close to 0. So sometimes the greenhouse has got down to about 1 degree Celsius, and these plants have done absolutely fine. They've just been left to go dormant. So this Colocasia yellow splash is in the same pot that I left it in last year. They are both, there's 3 plants here, but both of them two are Colocasia Redemption. But all 3 of these Colocasias are in a real free draining mix of multi-purpose compost and perlite. That allows me, when it comes to winter, to just stop watering. As it gets colder and they get drier, they just naturally go dormant. The leaves will shrivel up and fall off. Now that's happened. I've done nothing with them other than the last couple of weeks when they've come back into growth. The greenhouse has got warmed up in the sunny days and they've come back into leaf. Just the slightest bit of water. I will keep the watering to a minimum until they actively start growing, and yeah, really chuffed with how easy they've got through winter. No real work. Like I say, Colocasias during the summer when it's really hot like loads of water, but I'll always plant in a really free draining mix, because you can always, you know, if you're growing them in a pot, you can put a tray underneath and you can keep that well wet, but as soon as the nights cool down, you can pop that pot out of the tray and let it drain off a bit, so they don't sit sort of wet through on really cold nights. If in the ground, you can still have them in a free draining mix, but when you put them in the ground, put a bit of manure or something mixed into the soil at the bottom, then at least it's free draining around the corm, but they can get their roots down into that sort of good organic wet mixture. And for me, I've just found that over the years it makes it a bit easier to get them through our wet winters. I know in the US they tend to find these plants a lot easier to get through because their winters, their summers are a lot hotter, which tends to bring them out of dormancy earlier, and their winters probably just in a lot of places aren't as wet as what ours are. But what I would say is there is lots of finicky Colocasias out there, lots that are more hassle than they're worth, and I know because I've grown probably about 100 varieties over the years, and I've probably lost more Colocasias than most. But really surprised on how easy I found to get these through, just letting them go dormant. And Redemption is going to look like that, which in full sun, as it gets bigger, will get black glossy leaves and this pinky type veining through it as it matures and gets plenty of sun. Yellow splash, you will probably struggle to get hold of a bit more. Private sellers may have it. It's not really widely available in the UK, but for a variegated Colocasia, I found that it's been, you know, so much easier than a lot of the other variegated ones that I've grown in the past. So I'm going to give it a big thumbs up for that. Next year is probably going to be a completely different scenario, and I'll probably end up trying to do the same thing and they'll rot away, because that's how Colocasias can be sometimes. But I thought I'd mention it, and if you're interested in them, well worth growing, especially the Redemption. Right, I'm going to leave it at that. If there's any other videos in this series that you'd like me to talk about, plants you'd like me to talk about that I'm growing or you might be interested in, please leave it in the comments and I will see what I can do. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.